Okay, this is going to be the first in the series, Joomla 100, and we're going to cover installing Joomla. And right now I'm going to start with using Xampp locally. Most of this should be identical for when you're installing over the internet, but a lot of times it's easier for me to get the point across here locally. It's a lot faster too. Alright, so first thing we need to do is create a database, and by the way, this is the Xampp control panel. Alright, and you'll see you have access to your FTP, your Php.ini, anything to do with PHP or Perl. This whole setup can be downloaded from apachefriends.org. You want to scroll down to the installer and run. You want to make sure that Apache and MySQL are running as services. Alright, so that basically they're going to start with Windows. One thing of note, both Skype and TeamViewer, both programs will run. Skype runs on port 80 as an alternate port, and TeamViewer runs on port 80 as a regular port. So those two, if those two things are running, it will conflict with Apache trying to bind to port 80 on the local host. So you need to make sure that you alternately configure both of those programs so that they're not using port 80, either as alternates or as primaries. Or just make sure they're not running when you start Xampp. Okay? Alright, so let's get going with the database. Click Php.ini. Now by default the install is going to log you in with no root password. That's just the way that it's configured on a local host. Normally you would enter your username and password here, especially if it's on the web. You don't want to be open like this, but this is a local host, so the only person that has access to it is me on this machine. Alright, so we're going to go to create a new database. We're going to call it Joomla tutorial. Alright, and as you can see, I've done this a couple times with a few issues. Actually, I should probably bring that first issue up to you. If you're going to use the newer version of Xampp, we have a couple of things to take a look at. Actually, one thing. In the PHP folder, you're going to look for your Php.ini, which is right here. And by default, it's a very strict ini file, and you're going to want to scroll all the way down to the error reporting. You want errors to be reported, but there are several environments that you can safely ignore. Alright, and here we go. Error handling and logging, and this here, and I'll post this in the description. This is the error reporting that you want to set to it while you're using it in a local host scenario. Most of the times on the web you're going to be fine, but localhost it's a little bit stricter. I don't know why, but it creates a mass of errors that you can safely ignore. Okay, so that's the thing to be worried about when you're doing this locally. All right, so now that we have a database, we need to create a user for that database. So we click Privileges, add a new user, and username Joomla admin. It's always going to be localhost. Very few servers will actually have a remote MySQL database to actually hook to. Alright, so we're going to use create a password, and you want it to be fairly complex. Alright, we're going to grant all privileges on database Joomla_tutorial. Click OK, or go. Alright, so now here, oops, we're going to go to our folder that's actually holding the Joomla files, which in this case you would browse to your domain on the web, and it would actually start from this point. And most web hosts will have a Php.ini or some kind of a similar database configuration tool. All this can be done command line if you're that savvy, but most people aren't, so it's easier for the control panels to give you a GUI to handle that. Alright, so you're going to select your language. In my case it's English. Click Next. Alright, make sure everything checks out. Click Yes. If it doesn't, you can recheck make changes, recheck again. Here you need to accept the GNU license. Click Next. And if you want to actually read that license, it's on Joomla.org. They have a copy of it. Okay, so here you're going to make sure your type is MySQL. Hostname again is going to always be localhost 99 times out of 100. So the username is Joomla admin, the password you created for it. And we're going to go with the tutorial database that we gave it a name of Joomla_tutorial. Alright, click Next. Alright, for FTP layer, most often I don't enable this. There's simply no reason to be running FTP layers inside the Joomla installation. Very rarely will you ever see something that you would need that for, but if you do, this is where you would enter your FTP information and enable the FTP layer. Alright, so we go next. Alright, we're going to give it a site name, Joomla tutorial. And we're going to give it a password. And at this point, if you want to install the sample data, that's where you would click this button. To me, that just creates mass confusion. In the end, you're not going to know what's sample data, what's your data. You're creating new articles and everything. To me, it's just better to start with a clean slate, watch enough tutorials so that you're comfortable creating content, and then just leave it. Okay. At this point, if you wanted to load a migration script, there are some out there that will actually migrate you from one site to another. This is where you would load that up. To me, I'm not sure that this is where it should be run, but in this case we're just going to leave the default settings and we're going to do a fresh clean install. Alright, this is just warning you that you're not using sample data. That's fine. Click OK. Alright, so now we have, you're at the finished point here, and the newer version, I understand, has an actual button here that it will delete the installation directory for you. That's a nice feature. So right now, unfortunately though, with an older version, we're still at 1.5, the top of the cycle of 1.5 at 1.5.23. You have to do it manually, so you browse to the file, click it, and click delete. Alright, so now once the install folder is deleted, you can go to the admin side. Alright, and by default it's going to give you admin as your username. Unless you're installing this on a host that actually will go ahead and change that on the install script, most of the time it's going to be admin. And what I recommend doing completely is actually going into the user manager, and most developers will tell you this, that's a known user account, so you really don't want to do that. You don't want to use admin as your username. You want to change your username. In this case we'll just use webmaster, but you can, at that point you can create it, you can change it to anything you want, and you can also change your password at this time. Alright, make sure that this maintains super administrator privileges and click save. Okay, there are a lot of hacks out there that go with the idea that lazy webmasters won't change that, so that automatically they know a username that's going to exist. So that's always a good idea to change that and to keep it hidden. Alright, so that's about it for the install. It's going to give you the default template, and from here we can go about customizing to make it fit your own personal taste. So stay tuned for some more tutorials on that. Thanks for watching.